Welcome, everyone, to the Australian Bitcoin podcast. I'm Justin, your host, and today I'm joined by Hannah from Tutanota to discuss Tutanota's private email service. But before we start, a quick word from our sponsor. The Australian Bitcoin podcast is brought to you by hardblock.com.au. Hardblock is Australia's oldest Bitcoin-only exchange. They have no added fees and are optimized for dollar cost averaging. Sign up to Hardblock today using the discount link in the description below to receive free auto-send batch Bitcoin withdrawals for 6 months. All right, Hannah, how's it going?
Hi, Justin. Nice to meet you on this podcast today. Very excited to be here.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us. And we've got a bit of a time difference. I'm ending my day, you're starting yours. And I do appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk to us a bit about Tutanota and the private email service that you guys provide. So I guess to kick things off, a lot of listeners might not know about Tutanota. So I was curious, could you give a brief overview of Tutanota's history and general mission?
Yeah, sure. So Tutanota is basically, our approach is to build the alternative to Gmail, to have a privacy-focused alternative, something that doesn't track you, doesn't spy on you, and keeps your data secret and secure. And that's why we started building Tutanota about 10 years ago. It's an encrypted email service, so all the data inside is encrypted, and no one else can see what is going on in your mailbox. And that's basically the mission. The idea behind it is to have something that is yourself. You know, your data belongs to yourself and not to the company that hosts your data. And that's what Tutanota is about. That's why encryption is so important.
Absolutely. And about 10 years ago, I'm just thinking that might have been when Google removed what did they used to have as their tagline? Do no evil or something along those lines. And then they removed it. So maybe 10 years ago is about that time when they removed it. So I'm very glad you guys started moving into the space of email privacy then, because it's very easy just to go with the low hanging fruit or the path of least resistance, I guess. And I think everyone has a Gmail account. Probably most people have multiple Gmail accounts. But I do think that private email services like Tutanota and maybe some of the alternatives that we'll talk about today as well are definitely getting up to that same par where it's very easy to sign up, it's very easy to use. And I would personally believe the benefits that you get from things like end-to-end encryption and actually getting to basically control your own data and only release what you want to the world, i.e., the definition of privacy.
And when you say about this do not evil, like a few years later when we started off, there was then this Snowden revelations, and everybody was like, oh my God, everybody can see all my data, the FBI can get all my data, and the NSA. And that was when the awareness started, that people started to think about, before that, everybody was just using the internet and thinking, it's just on my computer, nothing happens to it. But then when this Snowden leak came, everybody was like, oh, this is all in the open. Everybody who has a bit of competence around the internet can actually see what I'm writing here, who I'm talking to. And this sparked the interest in privacy really and made Tutanota also a success. It was pretty interesting back then.
Absolutely. It makes sense. Actually, the Snowden leaks are probably one of the initial things that got me interested in privacy.
You're not the first saying that.
Yeah, it's just such a very strange. Of course, nothing really has been done about it. I feel like it's gotten worse and worse over time in terms of that dragnet surveillance. I don't think it's slowed down whatsoever. But it was one of those things that just made me think, well, that makes me kind of feel a bit gross. I don't know why that is, but that just seems a bit strange. Like the whole, I have nothing to hide, so I'm not really too concerned, I guess, but it still doesn't feel quite right. And the further you go down the privacy rabbit hole, the further you realize, like, this is a right that we have. This is not something that we should just give away. And I think a lot of people do. They click through the what am I thinking here? Like, the product disclosure statement, or they click through the disclaimer, and they just say like, yes, I agree to all these things. Yeah. And they're giving apps, they're giving websites pretty much carte blanche access to their information and the ability to send it on to third parties, which obviously a lot of people probably don't even realize they're giving away when that happens.
Yeah, exactly. This is the other part where the awareness is coming in about as we speak, kind of. My history, I'm from marketing, so I also see the other perspective. And it is rather scary what companies can track about you, what they can see, with all these cookies. You just always click yes, yes, yes. And then in the end, what the companies do is they know everything about you. They know what you like. They know if you're about to have a baby, they know everything about you. And this is this is something that you need to know when you use the internet. You're kind of like in a glass house, and everybody can see whatever you do.
That's right. You reminded me of something quite funny, and I'm pretty sure this is true, where Facebook, probably Google, probably any of these sort of like large marketing type services will be able to know if you're pregnant before you know
Yeah,
that you're pregnant because of the kind of things that you would be searching for, which, almost categorically by criteria, someone who's pregnant would be searching for those things. That really blows my mind. The fact that we have, I guess that would be like artificial intelligence algorithms that have just churned through so much data to create a pretty accurate profile. It's kind of scary because, they might seem harmless at the moment, and they might even seem quite useful at the moment for some people. But I guess the point is this data stays out there forever. You have no idea what it ends up being used for down the track, what kind of profiling that can be used for, not just
yeah.
about making your life a bit easier. Actually, someone made a comment in a recent podcast when we were talking about some of these things around data privacy, and they were saying like it's quite likely that we're training AI algorithms now, but who knows what kind of AI algorithms we're training in future? Are they to do with like military? Are they to do with maybe not even military, like terrorists? Who knows what it could be used for? But once the data is out there, once it's accessible, you don't really have any control over that anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't know what they will predict next about you, and then say, "Oh, you're going to be a criminal, so we need to investigate you now, even though you haven't done anything." And but the data already says you would. So yeah, it is pretty scary.
That's right. And look, for people listening that don't quite grok or understand why privacy is important, especially when they have the mindset of, well, I have nothing to hide and I don't like criminals. So if no privacy means we have less criminals and I don't really lose out, then that's fine. The problem is it's a very slippery slope. And
It is because he who defines what is criminal, and who, in the end, if I mean, in Australia, or for me in Germany, it's pretty easy to say this. Yeah, I've got nothing to hide because we have a stable democracy, we have rules, we have regulations. But then when you're in a country where they say, but you have if you criticize the government, then this is already criminal action. Then it becomes much more obvious to yourself why you need privacy and why this is important. um, if you don't have these freedoms, then privacy is the only thing that you kind of have to protect yourself.
that's right. I would say most protection, most security is stemmed from privacy in the first place. And yeah, you're right. Like the slippery slope, I guess, in my mind, is that even a country that has a functioning democracy, which I guess I could sometimes argue that Australia doesn't really have a functioning democracy, but we'll leave that tangent for another podcast episode, maybe. However, these things can change over time, and they in fact do change over time. If we look at history, there's no country, there is no area that has just had this level of stability in terms of how they're managed, that there's only ever been one prevailing political idea. There's only been one prevailing like theory or concept or philosophy that everyone just agrees with. Like it just doesn't work that way, which means that this is why we need these protections, just in case we end up being the dissident or the person
Yeah,
that has
yeah.
something, anti-government or anti whatever it might be, because it's not always about government.
It's funny that you say that, because this is exactly why the Germans are so interested in privacy and data protection, because we've had this, and it's not such a long time ago. I mean, that the Iron Curtain was lifted is just about 30 years ago, and back then in Eastern Germany, it was exactly what you described. It was total surveillance. It was you couldn't speak up against the government, or else you would lose out in life, and you always had to go along with the stream, and you weren't supposed to do any kind of actions the governments didn't like. And this is pretty recent history for us, and this is why lots of privacy focused companies do come from Germany, actually.
That makes sense. In regards to Tutanota, like staff, I guess even sort of the people who either own or manage it, I'm guessing they're very passionate about privacy. But I'm curious, like, what's driven that for them? Is it just that sort of that German culture, that history? Obviously, privacy becoming more of a thing, just globally speaking, or is there
Yeah.
past like other bits of more specific history that they've dealt with that's led them to starting and managing
Mm.
Tutanota?
Yeah, privacy is definitely one of the main drivers here. The passion that brought our founders together. They wanted to have something that is secure and private. But it is also the thing. I mean, they are developers themselves, so they knew about PGP and they were able to use it. But they said, this is just too complicated. We have to build something that is really easy for the end user, so that everybody can use it. Because up to then, 10 years ago, and now it's still very similar with email encryption, it is just so complicated, and so that most people, also myself, never ever used it before. So that's why they said, okay, we need to build something where it is already, the encryption is already integrated, it is already inside the product, and the person who uses it doesn't even notice. It's just secured automatically. That was the vision they had, to provide it for everybody.
That makes a lot of sense. So end-to-end encryption, or what is sometimes called zero-knowledge encryption, is a part of Tutanota's service. So any email that you send to another user, Tutanota doesn't get access to that, or they're not able to see it. It's essentially encrypted data. And that's one of the benefits of using it, say, over Gmail, where Gmail would be able to see that data. What other kind of benefits would you say there are for Tutanota versus just a traditional offering like Gmail?
Yeah, so as you said, it's definitely the security. But then it's also that we as a small company, we still care about our users. So we are pretty close to our people. When they come to us, when they have problems, when they complain, we always react. You won't find a user saying, oh, I've written an email to the Tutanota team and I never had a reply. It might take a couple of days, but we always reply, and we also always explain how it works. And this is a big difference, because you always have problems where you can't log in anymore, and then when you try to contact someone at Gmail, you reach a dead end. Your account is just gone. I mean, if you've lost your password, then it's probably gone in Tutanota as well, but at least someone will actually look into it and look if it's really your mistake, or maybe it is our mistake and we can do something about it. So you will definitely have that. um, yeah, and then also it is the suite, the privacy suite that we are building. It's not just email, so we are also now looking into a calendar. We already have a calendar inside of Tutanota, and the contacts, everything is encrypted. And about the contacts, what is important is we want to integrate the contacts better on mobile, so that in the end you do not need to have a contact list on your phone that is, for instance, connected to Google. Because right now, when you store all your contacts on your Android, then Google has access to your contact list. And once we have achieved to do this with Tutanota, we are already pretty close, then you can really also not just secure your own data, but also secure your contacts, your friends. This is pretty exciting for us.
Absolutely. And I think just sort of expanding the suite past email makes it even more user-friendly. I feel like a barrier for a lot of people at the moment who might even see the benefit of having like private encrypted email still think, but then I've got my calendar, or I've got contacts and syncing, and I've got this other app that I use, and that's linked in with my Gmail. And you know what? Maybe I'll sign up one of those private emails, but I'll keep using my Gmail for everything else. So the more that everything else can become part of a privacy suite rather than just private email, I think it's going to draw more and more people.
Yeah, exactly. And then I just came to my mind, what we're also pretty excited about is our desktop clients. We've built our own Tutanota desktop client, so you don't need Thunderbird or Outlook or whatever anymore. Because by doing so, we can also make sure that your data is even encrypted when it's on your device. So when you have the desktop client on your computer, then inside this desktop client, the data is still encrypted. And we have also just enabled offline mode for that, so that you can actually have your data offline on your computer and it's still securely encrypted. And you don't have to do anything. You just enter your password like when you log into Gmail, and that's it. And then this password and decrypts your data.
I think that's really important too, because if people are using, say, Tutanota's servers with a different type of app, like Thunderbird, for example, I'm pretty confident that Thunderbird is secure enough, but at the same time, there could be attack surfaces there that I'm not paying attention to if I'm just paying attention to Tutanota, for example. So having a native client that is made by Tutanota for your own servers and email and everything else. It just makes a whole lot of sense, because then at least you get oversight of what are the attack surfaces and how can they be mitigated, and you don't need to build in a bunch of extra stuff that isn't required for your service, whereas say Thunderbird might have a bunch of extra stuff that you don't need, and therefore that extra stuff actually becomes a risk essentially.
Yeah, and this is the thing about the risks. So we, as a company, we promise security to our users. We say, you know what, we encrypt all your data, we make sure it is secure, we make sure no one can look into it. And then we have to make sure that we deliver on this promise. And if you just connect, if you have APIs that connect the data to other services, like for instance Thunderbird, then you cannot promise this anymore, because you don't know we wouldn't know what happens to the data after that once you have, downloaded it to Thunderbird. And even though they are trustable as well, I think so, but we promise something. So we have to make sure the promise is delivered. And that's what we achieve by having our own clients, because we have control over these clients, and they are published on GitHub. They are open source, so everybody else can look into this as well. And look, they say they use a password to encrypt the data, but do they actually do that? Yes, you can have a look at the data. I mean, if you're a developer, if you know about these things, and people do look. So we get reports, bug reports, or security issues. So people do look at the code and tell us, there's something you need to improve. And then we say, oh, yes, thank you. We will do this right away. Because if you promise security, you have to deliver, and you also have to be transparent. So whenever there is something, whenever there is an issue, we always inform our users about this.
I think that's a really good sort of ethos to have. And generally speaking, I only recommend software or services that are open source because of that verifiability. And even though a lot of users wouldn't have the development experience to look through the code for vulnerabilities, the fact that the community there's a lot of other eyes looking over those things, and not just the community that's trying to help Tutanota. There would be, your competitors. There would be perhaps even hostile actors looking over that code. Yep. And so generally speaking, if there is an issue, it will come to light much faster than in a closed source system that you may never know about, even though there's a vulnerability being exploited day in, day out. So I think it's really important that people keep that in mind as a criteria for these sort of services. Is, anyone can make any kind of promise, but being able to show it transparently with open source software. And of course, to do further than that, to look down the track and say, well, how can we improve this even more? Like having your own mail application or expanding it past email. These are all good points.
Yeah. In our founders' view, security without open source is not possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise, what's the point? It just goes back to trusting. And this is a Bitcoin podcast. We'll talk maybe about Bitcoin a little bit at the end. I'll ask you some questions about it, not to put you on the spot, but just generally speaking. However, there is this ethos in Bitcoin, which is don't trust, verify. So everything that you do online, I think, should probably fit into that category. And if you can't, then you need to treat it very carefully, or perhaps even avoid that thing until there is an ability to verify the kind of claims that are being made, to verify that you're getting good privacy and security. In line with end-to-end encryption that Tutanota has, what is the policy on things like IP logging or any other kind of identifying information logging, like say a device fingerprint or something like that?
We don't do this in general. So device fingerprinting, not at all anyway. And also IP logging, we don't do this. We have, of course, some measures to see if someone, abuses the system, registers lots of accounts, or is sending spam from a certain IP. We do this with by anonymized.
Anonymized?
Yeah,
it's a difficult one. Yeah.
It is an important word, but I still can't pronounce it. Yeah, we do this by anonymizing the IP addresses. So, but still that we are able to, protect the system, that there's no abuse going on. And for full transparency, of course, we have the ability to log IP addresses, but we only do this when we have a German court order. So the barrier is very high. So a German judge has to say, yeah, we think this is a criminal using Tutanota. You need to log the IP address of this specific email address. And then we have to do this.
Understandably, I think you're bound by laws, really. I do have this vague recollection of within the past, probably 1 to 2 years ago, there was a case that came up where that was requested of Tutanota, but Tutanota then took it back to the court to challenge it. To be honest, I can't actually recall exactly what happened with that, but the fact that Tutanota was willing to challenge it first rather than comply shows the kind of, the ethos or the mindset there.
Yeah.
And for anyone...
Yeah,
Sorry,
we always check. We always check if a court order is valid, and if it's not, if we think it is not, we challenge it. Most of the times, if it's actually lots of orders are not valid, but most of the times this is because there's just a typo. The court just said, okay, you have to track this email address, and then they have misspelled it, and we have to say, yeah, but this email address doesn't exist. And then they have to come back to us with the correct address. And it is, it is crazy how this, is just issued, lots of them, really lots. And if the service doesn't check, if they don't look, you could be tracked without being a criminal just because of that.
Exactly right. They've put in something that's like a typo, or it's maybe they've identified an account that they shouldn't have. I think for any users that are wondering, not really ways around this, but ways you can like extra protect yourself rather than just assuming that your IP is not being logged, is using a VPN provider, or using, I'm not sure if you're able to log into Tutanota via Tor, if people have, they're proxying through Tor. I've used it before, at least via the Tor browser, so I think that's fine. But in terms of like apps on phones or on computers, I imagine it's still fine to be able to proxy through Tor and access Tutanota servers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is possible. Sometimes it's a bit difficult to register via Tor because for the same reason with the spam and abuse system. Unfortunately, spammers abuse Tor to trying to abuse our system. So sometimes we have to block registration from these kind of access points. But once you're registered, then you can use it via Tor easily.
That makes sense. And can you bypass that by paying for the service? So say if you are trying to register via Tor or a VPN and it happens to be a blacklisted IP address where it looks like it because there's been other people spamming on that IP address, for example, can you just pay a subscription to be able to bypass that? Or do you need to find, I guess, an IP address which hasn't been blacklisted first to sign up?
Yeah, for registering, it would be easiest to just find an IP that hasn't been blacklisted. If you run into, if you have a secondary email address, you can always just contact us and say, hey, I'm trying to register and it just doesn't work. And then we can, give you a one-time sign-up link. That's always possible. Because, for instance, we have this a lot from Russia, where the Russian government has blocked access to Tutanota. So then for them, they can only use Tutanota via VPN or Tor. And then when registration is complicated, they contact us, and then we help them out with these sign-up links.
That's really good, definitely. I actually wasn't aware that was available, so that's good for people to keep in mind.
Yeah.
If people are, just sort of while I'm on this train of thought, if people are going to pay for the service, because I think it is good to support services that you use to make sure that they remain open, what are the payment options? Because obviously that links in with privacy as well.
Yeah. Up to a year ago, we only had credit card and PayPal, but then we partnered with a little store in Germany. They're called Proxy Store, and they also sell Tutanota gift cards via crypto, so you can pay with Bitcoin or Monero. And I think you can also send cash if you like, but that might be a bit complicated from Australia.
Oh, that's true. A bit slow as well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But we've been pretty excited about this because it is a private anonymous option finally to pay. And yeah, as you said, definitely go for premium if you want to use Tutanota because it's only €12 a year. I don't know exactly what it is. This is in Australian dollars, maybe about 20.
Exactly.
So
very reasonable.
It is really, really affordable. And I mean, we have to pay our developers and our team, and we do not do any advertising or tracking. So it's definitely worth it.
That's right. And I think that is important as well as a criteria. If anyone is using any service, not just Tutanota, but broader, to know what is the profit model, because every business needs some level of either profit or funding. And if you don't know where that funding is coming from, like as the saying goes, you're probably the product. You're probably the reason that the business stays alive because of your data. So being able to know, look, there is a free service here. However, it's a freemium. So it's like more like you make your money off of the premium paid subscriptions instead, which makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, and exactly. Especially if you have your Tutanota account as a login or safety address for your Bitcoin wallets, I would definitely recommend to go with premium, because then you always have better security. And if you lose your password and things like that, you have better access to the team to help you get this sorted. With a free account, we just have to say, you know what, we don't know who you are, we don't know what is this address about. You've lost your password. The encryption key is encrypted with your password, so there's absolutely nothing we can do. While if you have premium, you can set up 2 users, for instance, and then one user can reset the password of the other user. So you can also have some backup security for yourself.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And I had another thought there. It's just come back to me. It had almost slipped my mind. Just on the point of supporting services that you use. So another, which you told me about, another email provider closed down recently called C-Templar, which was also a private secure email provider. I actually am not sure why they closed down, although I'm guessing with the kind of expedited process of how they shut down, it seems to me like it would be something like funding. So it's oh, did you disconnect and then reconnect?
I was kicked out. I don't know why. It just
Oh,
said a little thing said your call has been ended or whatever.
oh, okay. All right, good. Well, you're back now. Maybe it was just like a brief disconnection or something. Looks like we're
Yeah.
still recording and everything. Yeah, what I was saying there was just mentioning C Templar, how they recently shut down. I'm guessing due to funding or lack thereof, which just sort of going back to that point about paying for the premium service, despite there being some good features that would warrant it. To me, it's one of those things where, yeah, you want that reliability, you want that longevity. Otherwise, these businesses, yourself and others that are providing a good service, can disappear over time if they're not getting the support that they need. So it's just an important point for people to kind of come back to.
Yeah, and what is also, as you mentioned, C Templar, what is also important when you pick your service is kind of that you take a look who's behind this service, who is running this, what is the team, because especially in this privacy sector, there are also lots of companies or figures that just pop up and you don't know anything about them. And this is also a kind of a risk, because when you don't know anything about them, no one can hold them accountable if they just shut down or run off with your money. I mean, you have this in Bitcoin as well, these kind of scams. So it's always important also to look into these parts.
That's true. Again, the whole idea of don't trust, verify, find out, what's the history there? What's the reason? How long have they been around for? Can you verify the code and the claims? Do you have any gossip of why C Templar shut down? Is it just a funding thing, or was there some dodgy stuff going on, do you think?
I don't know anything. I just the only thing that I've read, but just on some forum, is that it was just a one person kind of thing, and no one really knew who he was. I think it was a he, or they think. But no, I don't. I also haven't looked closely into it. But probably it was a funding thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it is always difficult as a new service, and they have been pretty new. To get things going, especially with email, because you can't just set up an email service. I think setting up a chat app is much easier than setting up an email service, with all these issues with spam and all these kind of things.
That's right.
It could be that it was just underestimated when they started with the service, all the effort they have to put into it.
That makes sense. Yeah, you raise a good point. If there is a anonymous developer or an anonymous owner or whatever running a privacy-based company, it's such a strange conundrum, that one, because you would think, well, that should be allowed. I should be okay with that. But then at the same time, I have less ability to verify, who is this person? What is their history? Do they seem trustworthy? I guess if you can verify the claims in the actual code itself, that might be enough reassurance for some people. But Yeah, that's interesting.
And especially for email, as I said, when you use the email address to reset your wallet, and then this email address is gone because the service shut down, then what do? You've lost access to your wallet, and who
That's
knows
right.
what's in there. So that's also what we always say. The best part there is to just get your own domain, because then you're not connected to the service anymore. You've got your own domain. You can still connect it into Tutanota. You can still use it in Tutanota, and it's all super secure. But should Tutanota go down, which won't happen, but you always have to be always have to have a second option.
Backup
Then you can
plans,
just
absolutely.
a backup plan, exactly. Then you can just disconnect your domain and use it with another service, and you still have your email address. You can still reset your wallet password.
That's right. I'm just curious because we're talking, we were talking about C Templar. They're gone now. So, with say a comparison with Protonmail,
Mm-hmm.
if anyone's unaware, what are the differences between Tutanota and Protonmail?
Yeah, these two services, Protonmail and Tutanota are actually very similar in terms of encryption. So we encrypt all data, they encrypt all data. This is very, very similar. But if you look into the details, I would say that Tutanota does security a bit better. Because we don't just look into the encryption, but we always look into other parts where you can be tracked and where you can be, where your data can be taken from you somehow. So, for instance, we do not use any Google services. We do not use Google Push or Google Capture in Tutanota. We actually even have the app published on F-Droid, which is the alternative app store if you do not want to use Google Play. And for us, this is a big difference because, as we all know, Google is the main, the company that tracks you. And so the goal, if you want to go secure and private, has to be to remove yourself from Google as much as possible. And this is what Tutanota does better, definitely. And then another part is that we want to, because we are so passionate about privacy, we want everybody to be able to use Tutanota, to afford it. And that's why we have a very low entry price, which is €1 per month. And we think this is important because not everybody, can pay €5 or more per month for an email service. And we think this is important because we want everyone to be able to use an alternative and to go private.
Absolutely. It fits with that mission. I just maybe wanted to clarify something for anyone who's listening in and isn't sure how the encryption is managed. We talked a little bit about PGP earlier, and my understanding is that all Tutanota accounts have a PGP key. And therefore, if you send it... Oh, no? Okay.
No.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, that's another difference. So Protonmail does use PGP, and this is what you've just explained. In Tutanota, we decided against PGP because of the complexities I described earlier. And we have built the encryption ourselves with the same algorithms. So it's also, for the developers among you, it's also AES and RSA that does the encryption. And there's also a private key and a public key. So kind of very similar to PGP. But since we did the implementation ourselves, it is much easier to build add-ons. So to continue building Tutanota, to improve it further. For instance, when we developed the encrypted calendar, we only needed 3 months to get the interface, to finish the interface for the user, because the encryption was already completely done in the background with Tutanota email already. So we can just put the encryption onto any other service that we now add to Tutanota. And we also want to do a drive, of course, and a notes service. And this will be rather easy because we do not use PGP.
That's actually a very good point. So it's easier to customize and add-ons essentially.
Yeah.
So
but for email, it is also important that we do want to support PGP because for interoperability reasons. So right now, if you want to send an encrypted email to someone externally, then you always have to secure it with a password. Even if the other person, for instance, does have a PGP key published. But we want to have this interoperable, of course, and that's why we plan to support AutoCrypt, if you've heard about this.
I haven't heard of AutoCrypt before. No.
Yeah, this is kind of a standard for PGP. It's still work in progress. Some services support it already, others don't. But it should also make PGP interoperability a bit easier so that you do not have to find the other person's key. But this is kind of done by AutoCrypt for you.
Excellent. Well, that's a good expansion coming as well. But in the meantime, like you said, if you're sending an email to an external party that doesn't have a Tutanota account, you would set a password and then perhaps you would let them know. You'd call them up and tell them the password, or you'd see them face to face and let them know the password, or it's a password you've agreed upon previously or something like that, so they know how to decrypt the email when it's received.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this is also what sets us apart, but Protonmail has this as well. But if you have PGP, then you can't do that. You can only send to someone who has PGP as well. And with Tutanota, you can basically send an encrypted email to anyone with this password, which is pretty nice.
That makes sense. Am I correct in thinking as well that Tutanota, the email title is encrypted, whereas with Protonmail, the email title is not encrypted? And I guess maybe a trade-off there is searchability or something like that. But am I right in thinking that? It's like a vague thought that I have in my head.
Yeah. That's correct. We also encrypt the subject line. This was always also one reason why we decided against PGP back then when we started. It does make searchability more difficult because you can't search on the server. But we have built a search service that indexes all the data on your device and then searches the data there. So search is possible. It was just a bit more complex to set it up. But then on the other hand, you don't just want to search for email addresses and subject line anyway. You want to search the body as well.
True.
So we had to set this up anyway. So yeah.
But that seems like a good way to do it, is have the data locally and then people are searching through their own local device.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there any other differences between Tutanota and Protonmail that are worth mentioning?
No, not that it comes to my mind right now. We are a smaller team still, but we are growing fast as well. We plan to add 10 more people to the team in the next about 10 months. So one a month. That's pretty exciting.
That's good. It's a quick expansion.
Yeah, we've just moved offices 2 years ago, and then Corona came. No one was in the office, and now everybody's coming back, and we're like, okay, where do we put these new people? We need to move offices again. So basically, we had new offices, never used them, and now we kind of have to start looking for new offices again. It's crazy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think there's a bit of that going on with coronavirus throughout the world and those sort of changes. I have a query that does come up sometimes, and it is something that I often suggest to users that are looking for a private service, but I'm now starting to rethink it a little bit because I probably know your response. People that would look at Protonmail and say, oh, they're in Switzerland, so they have really great privacy laws. I know Iceland has that same reputation, and perhaps Sweden. I think it's mainly Iceland and Switzerland at least. They might look at Germany and say, well, they don't have as good privacy laws compared to Switzerland. Therefore, maybe I'm better off going with Protonmail because of the Swiss laws. What would your general response to that be?
Yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned it. Actually, I've lived in Switzerland for 2 years, and it's pretty amazing that they have this reputation, because when you talk to the Swiss people themselves, they are actually pretty annoyed by their government and that they want to have more surveillance laws and data retention and all these kind of things from their services. So if you ask the Swiss, they would say, no, it's not better. And the thing is that whenever you have it is a bit difficult from an outside perspective, because in Germany you have a very strong privacy focused
Kind of culture or
community, I would say, like also with the Chaos Computer Club, and there's a lot of lobbying going on against surveillance. And so whenever some politician proposes a new surveillance law, there will be a big uproar, also a big media interest in this, because so many people are against it. So it always makes the news, even internationally. And then everybody says, oh, there's a new surveillance law coming in Germany. It's really, really bad. But then the community pushes back. The law never comes. And outside of Germany, everybody will say, oh, there was a new surveillance law in Germany. So Germany is really, really bad in terms of data protection. When if you have this in a different country, for instance, like Switzerland, you will just not hear about it. because it's not such a big country and the community is not so loud. So from the outside, it looks like they are better, but from the inside, it's very similar. They are also bound to most of European laws because they always also said, yeah, we are not under EU regulations, so it's much better because honestly, the EU is doing bad things as well, especially in terms of surveillance law. So we have to now start pushing against these proposals on an EU level as well. But Switzerland is not free from that because they are connected to the EU so closely that they just, most of the times, they just adopt the laws.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And my understanding is if they receive a court order, if that's the correct term, from a Swiss court, they would still need to comply and collect, so like start IP logging or whatever it might be. And
so
that's good. Sorry, you go.
To sum it up, it's kind of what I wanted to say is the laws are pretty similar, but from the reputation, from the outside, people just think it's different.
Yes, that makes sense. I wonder if there's like a bit of cultural complacency there where a lot of people think that Switzerland is quite safe and private, and therefore there's not quite as much lobbying, whereas in Germany, different experiences and much stronger of a lobbying presence, much less complacent in that regard. Either way, it's good for people to keep that in mind because I know that does come up quite a lot. Is like, what's the jurisdiction? Is it a privacy-friendly jurisdiction? And I think it's just useful to know that regardless of how privacy-friendly the jurisdiction seems, there are pretty much laws in all places that will infringe on your privacy if there's enough justification to do so. So choosing services for various other reasons, like a lot of what we've talked about today already, makes a whole lot more sense.
Yeah, and then on the other hand, you also can't just place your service on some kind of island where there's no surveillance laws, because then you also have no consumer protection laws at all, which is also important. I mean, it is a trade-off you have to make, and you have to look closely. And what is most important is that the encryption is being upheld, that there's no backdoor coming, no legal no laws coming that say, you have to backdoor the encryption because authorities need to be able to look into it. This is very important to us and also very important to the German community. So I think we will be successful with that because there are, governments around the world, they always try. I mean, I think you have had your cases in Australia as well.
Absolutely.
And we have to be very careful with that because if you don't have encryption anymore, you just don't have privacy.
That's right. I mean, the silly concept that there's some good guys and there's some bad guys. So as long as we just give as long as we give the good guys the key, the bad guys won't ever get to it. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of data breaches that happen, and some of the biggest data breaches are government databases. So I wouldn't trust that backdoor encryption. Well, I think it's good. Yeah, good for users to keep in mind the general service that Tutanota provides. And if there is any concern over things like IP logging, again, I think you've explained that very well in terms of like when it would happen and when it wouldn't. Again, people have another option. They have things like VPNs. And overall, it sounds like, Tutanota is expanding to do far more than just email and calendars. You mentioned before, like a drive, kind of a Google Drive replacement. There was something else there, but it's sort of slipping my mind. But are there any other, kind of key features that Tutanota has in mind for future?
As I mentioned, the encryption part, we all know that quantum computers are coming in the next 20 years. And what is important to know there is that all the data you encrypt right now can be decrypted as soon as quantum computers are available because they just, calculate so much faster. They can just break your key and then they can get all the data. So we are already looking into post-quantum encryption. We have set up a prototype for Tutanota together with the university. It was a research project. It's very exciting. And so we have a prototype where we have post-quantum secure encryption also applied in Tutanota so that when quantum computers come, they will not be able to break reveal the data that is stored in Tutanota. And we want to continue with this project also to, have it as a real service, to implement it in Tutanota for everyone and it will just, to the user, it will just appear at some point, probably in the next 2 years. And then we will not just have the normal encryption, but also the post-quantum encryption to make sure that quantum computers cannot break into your data.
That's very cool. That's a very interesting project.
Yeah, we are also very excited about this, and it was a bit of a hassle, but yeah, we are very excited that we've got the prototype running, and it's very cool when you send your first email and then it's post-quantum encrypted. And you're like,
Yeah,
wow,
absolutely.
it actually works.
This is something that I guess Bitcoin developers will probably be looking into as well, because there was a theory that I like, and I can't remember where it came from exactly, but the theory is that Bitcoin is a quantum computing alarm clock, because I'm not sure how much you know about Bitcoin. I probably won't go into a lot of detail, but essentially the pseudonymous inventor of Bitcoin, their Bitcoin hasn't moved. And the pseudonymous inventor has stepped away from the project after just a couple of years into it. And so there is these theories that once those coins move, it's the alarm that lets us know that someone has developed some sort of either quantum computer or some ability to break the SHA-256 hash algorithm. So once that happens, that's not like the end of Bitcoin. All it means is that we'll probably need to roll back, do a chain reorganization if anyone's coins have been stolen due to that, and then implement something different to SHA-256, like a quantum computing resistant algorithm instead. So this is something that I'm sure a lot of different privacy and security areas are probably looking into. But yeah, just cool to know that it's actually getting traction, and you have sort of a test product for it as well. Very cool.
Yep.
So any other points that you wanted to just either reiterate or bring up that we haven't talked about yet in regards to Tutanota?
No, I'm just very exciting. Also, what you tell me about this moving coin thing. I will definitely look into this. I've never heard about it. I've learned something today. It's pretty nice. And yeah, what is so special about this privacy community, and I'm very happy that I'm in this community now, is that you just see everything from a different perspective and you start to understand everything so much more in detail. Like myself, I'm coming from a marketing direction. For me, it's the opposite. I want to know who is interested in privacy. I want to know who is into Bitcoin, because I know if I target these people, they will be interested in Tutanota and they will buy our product. So I understand why this tracking is important and how this tracking is done. And still, I understand why it is important for the user to not being tracked. And yeah, it's very exciting to have these both views and
try to find somewhere in between.
Yeah, not just find somewhere in between. I've come to a point where I think that all this tracking, it's not even necessary. I mean, we don't do it, even so we do marketing, we do advertisements, but we don't do tracking, and it still works. And the point is, we see that it works, so why do all these tracking? It's I think we have to as a community, as a society, we have to just change and make the internet better.
And I think a lot of privacy developers just kind of go back to the ethos of build the tools. If you have them feature rich and useful and solving the problem, then people will use it. And of course, if you talk about it and other people talk about it, that's the marketing that you need. Does it need to be completely targeted? Does it need to be, like you said, driven by or informed by tracking? If you build the tools, people will use it and people will talk about it, because kind of good tools will rise to the top. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And it is a bit sad that all these marketing or advertisement paid services, they had a head start. So like Google, Facebook, and they've been around for decades now, and they have large user groups, so they can basically do whatever they like and they will not die, so to say. But now with these privacy services, it's nice to see that they do find their niche and that they are growing at an exciting rate, and people understand why this is important. And I'm pretty excited that we will change the internet for the better.
Absolutely. And I think open distributed software, especially ones that focus on what the users want, which is generally things like privacy and security, and less bloat and less tracking, that's something that's going to rise to the top. because you can look at so many examples of this, Linux being now the most run operating system on servers, and Microsoft had the majority market share of that very early on. You can even look at things like people using the BitTorrent protocol to even download things that are not pirated. That is now starting to become more prolific than just downloading it from a central server or a mirror on a central server. So there's all these different little pockets that I can see where, looking at open distributed systems that are focused on privacy and security are starting to win out over these very kind of dominant players that have been there for, you're right, decades, and have so much data stored to be able to, target you really, really well with really good marketing. But I feel like it is kind of a mindset of the past. I don't think most people have realized that yet, but there is a growing proportion of people that do, and that's a one-way street. No one discovers privacy and security and the freedom that comes with it and then says, oh, you know what, I'm actually going to go back. I like that other thing better. I want to be surveilled and marketed to and have no privacy or no control of my data whatsoever. Like, no one really says that, essentially.
No. Yeah, and what goes along with that is, with all these advertisements, it's also a lot of data, and it is your phone that has to process all this data, and then people start complaining, oh, why is this so slow? And it's like, because you're loading all these advertisements, just get an ad blocker and your phone will be twice as fast.
Exactly right.
And why would you go back then? I mean, there's just no point.
That's very true. And so do you know much about Bitcoin? Have you, or is anyone in Tutanota interested in Bitcoin? And
one of the founders is very passionate about Bitcoin, and he also wants to support it natively to pay with Bitcoin. Also because of the idea of decentralization and not being tracked, especially when you pay, because with these central services, it's like with Google Ads, you're just in a glass house, and the government can see everything that you do, that you pay for. And as we are in Germany and we don't like the government knowing everything about us,
absolutely.
he's very excited about this. And we just unfortunately haven't gotten around to actually implement it in Tutanota, because we also don't want to just add any service that does the payment processing for us, also because of security. And we like to keep everything in-house to, when you're responsible, as I said before, when you promise security, you have to deliver. And as soon as you outsource something so essential to a service, there's always a second party that needs to be trusted, and we don't want that. That's the reason why it hasn't happened yet.
That makes sense. But like you mentioned earlier, people can pay for the service via Bitcoin using a payment processor. So I think most Bitcoiners would be happy with that, to be able to spend it if they need it.
Yeah, and that's why we did it this way, because then it's transparent. Then when you pay this other service for the gift card, it is a different service. It is not Tutanota that I'm giving my Bitcoin to right now.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think over time you will probably hear more and more and more about Bitcoin as not just adoption takes off, but I think a lot of these areas, like private email, for example, or VPNs, or password managers, like all these things it's like a Venn diagram. They have a lot of crossover with each other. And I feel like Bitcoin is like somewhere there in the center, where it's like free, open source, distributed. A lot of people that are contributing to it have that privacy and freedom ethos in mind. And I guess just the utility of it. I'm even thinking of a bit of a tangent example here, where one of the pieces of technology that went into Bitcoin, believe it's reusable proof of work, it is almost like you put up a stake of something if you're going to send an email, for example, and it's trying to be anti-spam. So if you want to send an email to someone, you have to stake something, or you have to sacrifice something. I think the original idea was like getting your computer to do a bunch of stuff, like a hash algorithm or something like that, which uses energy, and then you can send the email. And therefore, spammers would have this, this detriment. If they want to spam, they have to actually expend a lot of energy, expend a lot of money, of resources. So they likely wouldn't. But there's some ideas that are being floated around in the Bitcoin space at the moment that says maybe we should just like put up some collateral. So if you want to send an email to someone, you have to collateralize and say, like, I'm going to put up a $1 worth of Bitcoin. And if that person wants to get my email, they can then send that $1 worth of Bitcoin back to me when they respond, and we can go back and forth, and no one's actually losing any money by doing that. However, if you get an unsolicited email, or if someone is actually spamming, each time they're putting up this dollar collateral, they're losing it because the receiver looks at the email and says, I never wanted to get this. And so they take it. So I can just sort of see all these areas, especially things like email, where there still isn't like a perfect solution for things like spam. Whereas Bitcoin, which not a lot of people would see as a solution for spam, there's just ideas in there that would make it so.
Pretty nice idea.
Well, I guess that's pretty much most of the questions that I had for you. Actually, I learned a few things about Tutanota in this, and I did a bit of preparation beforehand. So it's always, it's always fun having that experience, actually, like learning a few extra things. So is there anything that you thought we're going to talk about, but we didn't get around to, or any sort of final thoughts?
It was perfect. I actually learned something myself, which is always exciting. I had a Linux call like a year ago it was similar, and it's just so nice to get to know the community and also get feedback. So yeah, thanks. It was brilliant.
No problem at all. And look, if you're ever keen to learn more about Bitcoin, it sounds like one of the founding members will probably happily talk to you about it, but I'm more than happy to as well.
Thanks, Justin. It's cool.
No worries. Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. If you enjoyed it, please share it around. If you listen on a podcasting app that lets you leave reviews, then please do that too, because that does help the podcast out. Otherwise, again, thanks for listening, and until next time.